Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to our session today on bridging cultural differences in ministry. My name is Alyssa Fisher. I am the Director of Communication here at Cal-Pac, and I just want to welcome you to our Learning Lab series. This is a mostly weekly webinar series that we have, and we are in the middle of our fall session, and we aim to provide you with some sort of practical and easily adaptable tools for your ministry, whether you are clergy or lay. And we hope that this session today will be helpful to you. I do want to highlight a couple things that we have coming up and a couple tech notes before we get started, but it's good to have you all here for our lunchtime learning lab today. We are, like I said, in the middle of our fall series, and so the rest of September, we have a couple more sessions coming up next week. Reverend Trudy Robinson will be doing Church in the Digital Age, talking about how San Diego First UMC really adapted their worship design, their membership levels, and just the ways that they interact with people to meet more of the digital needs of this world, including rehauling their church vision. So I saw her do a talk about this in February, and I really found it inspiring and thought that you all would find it helpful. And so I asked her to come. So she'll be here with us next week in the evening in our evening time slot at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. And then the following week, our Executive Director of Connectional Ministries, Aaron Hawkins, will be talking about cherishing community, cultivating the future, kind of talking about the future of our conference and the direction that we're moving in and how we can all work together to be more creative and cherishing and stable as a group. And then at the end of September, beginning of October, we will be doing the ever exciting Charge Conference Forms trainings. So Jennifer Gaylord, our dear Jennifer, our statistician, and our database manager will be leading those sessions for us. But today we are talking about bridging cultural differences in ministry. We have April Casperson here with us. Reverend Casperson is the Director of Enrollment Management at Methodist Theological School in Ohio. She's an expert in diversity and inclusion, and we've asked her to come and talk about kind of best practices for your church navigating both planned cross-cultural interactions and sort of those unexpected moments that come up that might have some unintended negative consequences or impact on folks. So how we can kind of get ahead of the game on that. And I do just want to remind you that we are recording today. So if you don't want to be a part of our official documentation, you can turn your camera off and stay muted. We will also have some Q&A time at the end, and the chat is always available for you to share your questions and comments as well. So I'm going to pass it off to April. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us from Ohio. April and I have a Southwest Ohio connection. So I lived in Southwest Ohio for a while, and that was fun to make that connection when we first met. But thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you.
Oh, thank you so much, Alyssa. And it's really good to see all of you. Thanks for being flexible with the time. I'm in the Eastern time zone, and so trying to figure out the time that worked for everyone. So I'm going to share my screen and give me a second to get that started. And I'm really thankful to be here with you. In a moment, we'll have introductions. You can introduce yourself in the chat if you would like. And then we'll put a handout in the chat at the end of the session as well. And also, you're welcome to drop questions into the chat as we get started and throughout the whole conversation today. So what we're going to do is building bridges across difference and some best practices. So the goal is to send you home with some strategies of what you can do in your local church and in your ministry settings in really building those bridges and managing conversations. So just a tiny bit about me. I invite all of you to put in the chat who you are or what church you're representing or even your district. I am in the Olentangy River District of the West Ohio Conference, which doesn't mean much to anyone, but that's okay. My primary appointment, I am a deacon. I oversee enrollment and help with candidacy and fundraising and alumni relations at MTSO. one of our 13 schools. I'm also a consultant, so I work with a number of annual conferences and some of our agencies and different organizations and colleges and universities around diversity, inclusion, conflict management, emotional intelligence, and I also work with boards of ordained ministry. And I was previously the director of diversity and inclusion for West Ohio. And long story short, before I was at the conference office, I was at MTSO the first time for over 10 years. So, Sunny and Neil, good to see you. Thanks for putting your information in the chat. So, the goal today is to go into your afternoon with some actions and some strategies for managing relationships and building districts. And so, just a bit of our framing. It's really hard for us sometimes to love our neighbor as ourselves because it requires us to reflect upon our own biases. It's sometimes challenging work, and this is going to tee up what we're going to discuss in a few minutes. But this workshop is to help us acknowledge our realities, think about how we can better build bridges, and really become more like Christ. I really like this scripture because it reminds us that we're not all supposed to be the same. And this is the First Nations translation. You can find that in print, a New Testament. And then I think they might be coming out with a Hebrew Bible. It's an indigenous translation with multiple voices and multiple groups providing an authorized translation. But it reads, Creator in great kindness has made me a message bearer. I give this message to each of you. Do not think too highly of yourself. Instead, understand that the Great Spirit calls us to different purposes in answer to our trust in Creator. For just as our bodies have many members and each member has a different purpose, it is the same way with the body of the chosen one. We are members of Creator's body, and each member belongs to all the others. One of the joys of being United Methodist is that we are a connectional system. We're not doing this work alone. Although, when we're separated by miles or districts or geography, it can feel like we're doing this alone. And if our churches are having challenging interactions or there's some opportunities for growth, it can feel very isolating. But the good news is that we are members of Christ's body and each member belongs to all of the others. Before I flip ahead, oh, look at all these people in the chat. This is great. Oh, good to meet you all. Good to meet you all. Thanks for sharing. So, this is not an exciting definition, but this is the grounding of our work. We're looking at cultural competence, which is the ability to really work across difference and bridge differences. So there's kind of some corporate language on this slide talking about how cultural competence is a lifelong process and it requires reflecting on your own values and worldviews and then how they impact the world, and then understanding and respecting people and groups who may be different from you and yourself. A simplistic way, in a good way, you can think about cultural competence as the ability to bridge differences. In other words, this is the muscle that we're trying to grow in our churches. I also think that in the whole of the United Methodist Church and in the church, Big C, like all of our churches across denominations, this is the muscle we're trying to grow, the skill to bridge differences. It is really easy for us to be surrounded and be only in deep relationship with people who look and think and talk like us. You can be exposed to all sorts of difference in race and socioeconomic status and vocation and community and religion. But when you really look deep down and say, well, who do I have deep relationships with? You may only be in relationships with people who look and think and sound like you. And so cultural competence is a muscle that we're helping our churches and ourselves in our discipleship try to grow. And that's the grounding for some of these strategies we'll jump into. And also just a reminder that we lead because of the people that we serve. The church is not something that is there just to meet our needs. We have the opportunity to serve and to reach out to all people. And also, we are deeply rooted people of God. We are not isolated, but we get to be in community together. I do want to say that opening ourselves up to caring about people who are different from us can be a scary thing. And this is much different than surface level being friendly. But learning how to interact and connect with people who are different, it's a scary thing because sometimes we get it wrong. And sometimes we misstep and sometimes we offend. Um, some of my work is in higher education, like I work in graduate theological education, where laity and clergy are thinking about ministry as lay and as clergy. And oftentimes in higher education organizations, there's a lot of conversations about social class and race and other dynamics. And it's challenging, and it can be very easy to say, well, we'll stay over here and you stay over there, and we'll be surface level polite and everything will be fine. But that's not actually the case. And that's why a lot of us are here too. And I think churches have that same challenge. This is a little blurry, but I always like to use this little cartoon. It's a group of people sitting around the table and they say, what if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? Has anyone been in a church where people act like that? I know I have. So, a bit of scriptural basis before we move into some action steps and some tactics. Every time Jesus interacted with someone, he reached out across difference and he reached out across different dimensions of diversity. Now, Jesus was fully human and fully divine. No one else is like Jesus in that way. So let's put that part aside. But every time Jesus interacted with someone, he interacted across difference. You remember the woman at the well? He was crossing differences in gender, social location, religious beliefs, probably race and community of origin. Remember when Jesus fed the 5,000? I bet you had racial diversity, you had age diversity, you had geographic diversity as all of those people were being fed. Remember as Jesus collected all of those disciples, it is very likely that they were racially different from each other. You probably had generational differences. You had some younger men, you had some older men, you had people who maybe walked away from jobs. You had people who walked away from their community because they didn't have a job. What do you think it was like? And then there were probably women and others who followed those men. So it wasn't just the 12 male disciples. But think about what it meant for those people to go on the road together with all of those differences. And their connection point was Jesus. There were probably some clashes and there were probably some interactions where they didn't get it right. So, as we're thinking about what it means to reach out to people who are different from us, and also, like, just if I can be just frank, not mess up those conversations, not cause harm, not be offensive, we can remember that our faith is our why. We are reminded that our faith is based upon reaching out to those who are different from us. And we are allowed to do that as well. Our faith really empowers us to work across difference. And also, our faith allows us to connect with people who might not think the same way as us. It's interesting to remind people that when we're trying to build bridges and really bridge differences, it's not about losing what we stand for or losing our own identities. It's about building bridges and deeply understanding why other people think and act and believe the way that they do. It's not about lowering standards, but about building bridges. And then I don't know, I don't know all of your backgrounds. I'm thinking some of you came today because you want to grow personally. You might have also come because you feel like your church is getting it wrong or not doing a very good job with either reaching out to a new community, or you have new church members who are starting to attend or become members, but people aren't very good with interacting with them, the people who have been there forever, and then the new people. And so it may be helpful for you to reflect upon why we want to build bridges. And these are the kinds of questions you can also take back to your church. When we're trying to build bridges, when we're trying to practice having healthy interactions with people who are different from us, we can have a lot of different motivations. And all of these little bullet points are presented as neutral bullet points. Everything from why do we want to be better in relationship building? Our faith tells us that we can. Or is it that we don't want our church to die and we're trying to connect with new people and we keep getting it wrong? Maybe there's a hope to get a little more practice. Maybe there's some honesty like, well, we haven't been very good at this before. We'd like to try it again. maybe there's a genuine sense of care, but you feel like there's some communication differences or some rubbing the wrong way. Um, Sometimes people want to reach out because they want to bring in nostalgia or to reach out to one group but not another. And sometimes it's about valuing a community. So, as you're thinking about either in your own discipleship or in your church, how to reach out across difference, it's helpful to think about the motivation for that. You can also reframe this slide and you can take it to your church. You'll get this handout and you can reframe the question to say, why do we want to grow? And all of those bullet points will answer that question as well. And right when we start getting into some tactics, the last thing I'll share is that sometimes when we start to dream, and dreaming includes really having healthy relationships with people who are different from us, it can be really easy to say, gosh, this is too hard. I don't want to do it. And it's really easy to talk yourself out of engaging with people who are different as a church. And here's some of the reasons that I have heard out loud before. What if we really get good at making these interactions healthy? What happens if new people start coming and we lose our church identity? Or what if everyone who is here keeps coming and everyone actually does show up all at once? Or what if it gets out of control and we have more and more interactions that are challenging, hopeful but challenging? Or what if we get it wrong? Or what if we get it right? What happens if we actually build bridges? Kind of scary. So here's what we're going to do. Here's some tactics to get started. Healthy interactions. In order to have healthy interactions with people who are different from yourself, you have to start with the self. And I know that that is not exciting. And I know that that was not what you were looking for, and I'll give you more action steps in a minute, but this is where we have to start. One example, in higher ed, there are often colleges and universities, 2 and 4 year colleges and universities, where they were predominantly white institutions. And then they became more and more racially diverse, which is great. And then there were cultural clashes because there were different percentages of people, different communities, different racial ethnic identities, different sets of values and priorities, and there was clashing. Oftentimes, colleges and universities that are predominantly white and are racially changing are like, okay, we need to learn more about our Black and Brown and Asian and Hispanic students. And that is good. But what really needs to happen is that predominantly white core needs to reflect upon what does it mean to be white, or what does it mean to be the stakeholders, or what does it mean to have power. And so when we're thinking about building bridges, we have to reflect upon who we are. I don't know the racial makeup of your churches. I need to share my bias and my context. I am in the West Ohio Conference. I am a multiracial woman. I am white and Black. And then in West Ohio, our churches are 93% white and our clergy are 90% white. So my environment is a very predominantly white environment. And a lot of those churches are trying to change and grow in racial ethnic identity. And these white churches are often saying, well, we need to learn more about people who are different from us. And I'm like, yes. And you also need to reflect upon what does it mean to be white. Those dynamics may not be the case in your annual conference or in your church, but I just wanted to lift that up. And so I'm not going to ask you to answer these questions today, but I am going to encourage you to take these reflection questions, and you'll have them in the handout, to your church and have some small group or some leadership team conversations trying to answer these questions. Like, who is your church today? A lot of churches, they have identities, but those identities may be 5, 10, 15 years old. And so getting people to reflect upon who their church is right now can be really helpful. Also, that it's a very open-ended question, but what is your church like and who attends? But then also a conversation about what do you value? And it can be helpful to know if there is consensus in your leaders when they talk about what your church values, or if there is not consensus. So diversity can be defined as simply any difference that makes a difference. And It's not necessarily a scholarly definition, but it can be a very helpful definition. Any difference that makes a difference. And so a dimension of diversity is simply any difference that makes a difference. This list on here is not comprehensive at all. This is just to get you to start thinking. And so there's lots of differences that make a difference. I'm guessing some of you are on here because there are some racial ethnic clashes or dynamics, but I've seen also in churches socioeconomic diversity be a challenge to bridging those differences, political views, ability or disability, persons who have been impacted by addiction or incarceration, that impacts how we look at the world, gender and sexuality. Also, neurodiversity is a dimension of diversity, as well as sheltering. That's a newer word for me, like where you live and how you live. Are you leasing? Are you buying? Are you in an intergenerational household? Are you doing those things by choice or by circumstance? And so I invite you, I'll go back to the slide in a minute. Let me type this into the chat. One moment. And I can't talk and type, so hold on. So I invite you, I'll go back to answer this question. What are the dimensions of diversity or differences that make a difference? What's showing up in your church? So if you can put into the chat, are there any differences that make a difference that are showing up in your church? Is it race? Is it socioeconomic status? Is it politics? Is it gender and sexuality? And you can write down things that aren't listed here as well. So I'll give you a minute if you have some ideas. And as you're thinking, like I'm in a graduate school. Okay, Jan, all of the above. That works. Like I'm in a graduate school. MTSO is about 55% United Methodist and 20 other denominations. So we have gender diversity, we have theological diversity, we have political diversity, we've got age diversity, race and ethnicity. So it's really any difference that makes a difference. Okay, Kathy, okay, yes, and hearing impaired, that makes sense. Language, age, and music, okay, I see that. These are good examples. And yep, race and ethnicity and educational background. Hmm. Jennifer, I appreciate your answer. Like, we don't talk about Bruno. I understand. I am in the Midwest. We are very polite sometimes. And ability differences. Okay, these are great examples. It's interesting. Sometimes I'm working with churches that really are like 100% white, and they'll say things like, oh, we don't have any diversity. And it's like, you do. You just may not have racial ethnic diversity, but there are all sorts of things, either visible or underneath the surface. Economics, this is great. Okay, this is great. I'm going to keep going, but if you have an aha moment, feel free to put it in the chat. You're also welcome to put questions in the chat too, and we'll talk at the end. So again, you saw this slide a few minutes ago. This is cultural competence. Just a reminder that the muscle we're trying to grow is the ability to bridge differences. So just trying to reinforce the concept. So here are some examples where I invite you to think about your church and think about how well your church may be doing this or not in terms of bridging differences. And so these are 3 church examples, each at a different area of growth. So the first one is a church with the opportunity to grow in cultural competency. I don't know if this will feel like any of your churches or not, but you've got like there may be 1 or 2 people who would be considered a minority, and that may be race, it could be socioeconomic status, it could be gender, it could be all sorts of things. But there's a tolerance, and I'm using that word deliberately, of maybe a few persons who are not of the majority. power and decision making comes from practices and really holding on to power. People may say, "Oh, we love everyone. We don't have a problem." And you think, that's not great, or you're missing the mark. Policies and procedures are a high priority. And then the last bullet point engages issues of social justice on the leader's terms. That would be like if you have a group in the church that's saying, we're not very good at interactions with this community, or it's not going well, or things are unhealthy. And the church leader says, well, we have a mission project and we're just going to focus on the mission project. We're not going to really work on what we really need to work on. So I don't know if this may feel like your church, but this is one example. So here's a church where they're doing okay in interacting and really bridging those differences. Uh, there may be some assumptions that are made about who is in the pews or in the chairs or who is in the community. Relationships may be polite and may be nice, kind of like was it Jen who said, yep, Jennifer who said, we probably have political differences, but we don't talk about it. So relationships are pleasant and nice, but not necessarily deep and vulnerable. Whenever people are trying to engage in change, they feel frustrated. There's not an actual interest in engaging with new people other than being polite. And then if someone is an outsider in some way, there's pressure to go along to get along. Don't rock the boat. Don't cause any problems. Um, and then a performative justice seeker. I have seen this in churches that may be great around gender and sexuality. And I recognize, like, I'm in West Ohio, so it may feel different than Cal-Pac, but a church that's really doing good work around welcoming all genders and diversity and sexuality, but they won't talk about race. And they really need to talk about race. So they choose one thing they're really good at, and then we say, oh, we're done, we're fine. And then this is the goal. So this is a culturally competent church. This is the church that's doing well in those interactions across difference. De-escalated conflict. It means that there is conflict, but they work through it because conflict is not necessarily bad. There's a growth mindset, a willingness to try new things and to get it wrong a little bit and to practice. There's an interest in innovation, new people who are starting to get engaged in organizational mission and vision, and not as tokens, but as real decision makers and community members. And then really meeting and seeing people where they are. So no longer making assumptions, but moving into more deep relationships. So I'm not going to ask you to answer this necessarily, but it might be helpful to reflect upon where your church is and if you see your church in some of those slides, and then to remember that a church that is growing, they can't jump all the way from the beginning to the end. They've got to move into some growth. So this is just reflection question for you later. But the good news is, and we're getting to your action steps now, your comfort zone is very different from where the magic happens. So here are 4 steps and action steps that you can take in managing these relationships and really improving these. Oh, thanks, thanks, Harris UMC. You can feel it though. It's like if you're uncomfortable, you're doing it wrong. I know, I hate it, but it's true. So here are your steps. Your first step, and we're going to talk just individually first. What is your cultural background? What are your dimensions of diversity? And what kinds of difference have you been exposed to in the past? Again, I know it's tempting to say, well, I've got to look at the other, but you've got to reflect upon yourself first. Like, what are the differences that make a difference in you? Is it your racial identity? Is it your gender? Is it your age? Is it your vocation and your work in the world? Is it your political beliefs? Is it your socioeconomic status? What are the differences that make a difference in you? Because that's going to shape how you engage with and connect with people who are like you and also who are different from you. And then a second reflection question is, what kinds of difference have you been exposed to in the past? Like in the words of Bishop Palmer, there are no bad people. I have met people where it's okay that we'll have a conversation and they say, you know what, I never really had a conversation with someone who's racially different from me until I moved away, until I went to college, or till I did went into a certain kind of job. And so reflecting upon when in your life have you been exposed to people who were different from you? And then when in your life have you had relationships with people who are different from you? Then the next step, practice. Practice with someone who you can make mistakes with. This may feel really strange, but if you ask someone, like find someone that you care about and that you trust, like don't if you're a supervisor, don't do someone who's below you. It's got to be a healthy kind of flat relationship, but find someone who you trust and ask them if you can have a conversation with them about your similarities and differences. You can blame me or you can blame Cal-Pac and say, I'm doing this because of this little workshop. But if you have a conversation with two people to just talk about your similarities and differences, it may be really, really profound. And it may really open up your eyes to think about, wow, I was making assumptions and I had no idea. And they may learn something about you too. Sometimes when I'm working with leadership teams like a conference staff or a cabinet or like a board of ministry, those are all very Methodisty teams. But if a group is trying to grow in cultural competency, in other words, grow the muscle of having conversations with people who are different, I assign people this little exercise and I let them choose their friend so they can choose someone that they care about. And I'm like, take 2 weeks, come back and let me know how the conversations go. People will come back and reflect and like they'll weep about what they learned about their friend and about themselves. And so this is helping you grow the muscle on how to better interact with people who are different from you. And then the next step is to find your cultural bridge builders. So if you think about either your church or outside of the church, who in your circles are the people who really can connect with others who are different from them? If you sit here and if you think about who do I know who gets along with most people, not everyone, but most people, they would be considered bridge builders. Or if you think about people who can really move across different organizations or different groups of people and really fit in, then ask their permission and then ask them some of these questions. Ask them about their experiences in connecting with others who are different from them. What do they do to build bridges? Like, how did they learn this? Were they born this way? Did they figure it out through a job, through their church? What benefits do they gain from this bridge building? What has been challenging? Because none of us get it right all the time. And then how do they work through these challenges? Now, these are very open-ended questions. I don't know what you will learn, but you could really have some aha moments to say, oh, here's how I could be healthier in interacting with people who are different from me. And then finally, do your own work, cultural humility. I know that we're talking about cultural competence, the ability to bridge differences. Sometimes it is helpful to reflect upon the concept of cultural humility. Again, this is a very clinical definition, but the cultural humility is reflecting upon who you are and about people who are different from you and understanding power dynamics and imbalances. I am wondering if some of you have encountered some of those power dynamics and imbalances, and you may have been on one side in one interaction and on the other side in another interaction. But thinking about the dynamics of power and privilege as you're having challenging interactions or observing them in your church. And then the little bullet point at the bottom says institutional accountability. In other words, our churches are tasked with engaging in cultural humility as well, not always assuming that our way is the right way, or if we're in the majority, whatever that may mean, that everyone has to defer and connect with us. So as you go back into your church, here are some action steps that you can take to your leadership teams or to the small group that's going to be working on this. If your church is really trying to improve these interactions, determine your goal. Remember your why. Why are you trying to connect with people who are different? Or maybe you have diversity there and you're not doing it well. So why do you want to do it better? Is it self-preservation? Do you want to feel better about yourselves? Do you want to stop messing up? Do you want to be more like Jesus? Do you want to build community, think about your why. Know your triggers. I know that that's kind of a harsh thing to say, but figuring out, is there a certain kind of interaction where there's some people in your church where it's just not great? Know kind of the worst case scenario. Um, Suspend judgment. That can be hard, but assuming that everyone has positive intent, at least until they tell you that they don't. And then be prepared to use your intercultural knowledge and skills. If you are a bridge builder in one area and you see a growing edge in another area, what can you transfer from what's worked well? And then also transformation takes time. Like you're not suddenly going to become culturally competent as a church, but it takes practice. So there's your preparation. And then your engagement, emphasizing commonalities. The outcome, the goal is listening and building bridges, share openly, story tell. You can tell about your world and your experiences, and then invite other people to tell about their own interactions and stories. And then the bottom little checkbox is to have a follow-up conversation. Like this is not just one and done. It takes time to build relationships, especially relationships across difference, and it takes time to get to know each other. So some final thoughts. I suspect there might be one or two or more of you on this Zoom where you really see an opportunity for your church to build bridges, and you're like, well, the rest of my church doesn't see that we need to do this work. In other words, what if a lot of people in your church think, oh, we're fine, we welcome everyone, and you're like, we do not welcome everyone. Well, if you have people where if you said we should practice cultural humility and they would say, what is that? That doesn't sound interesting. This is your change network. I don't want you to leave feeling discouraged and feeling like you're the only person. You only need like 15% of people in the church to change in order to move toward health. And so you can think about engaging your change network. People respond to change at various paces. And so maybe there's a handful of people where if you share about, this is my goal, we're going to get better at these interactions. Maybe you get 4 people. That is enough. Those will be your quicker adopters and they will move and bring others along. So your early adopters. Then you have people who are in the blue, the early majority, later majority. They might not be your pilot group. They might not be the people who are first in line, but they're going to communicate and say, okay, I think this is working. Look at this healthy community that we're building. Um, and really bring them into the process. And then the green at the bottom, I probably shouldn't have turned it green. Contrarians, they're the people who argue no matter what, and they will always tell you that you're wrong. And that's fine. Give them opportunities to participate, but don't let them bog you down. In other words, there's always going to be people who are grumpy or who don't see the value of this work. Just let them be grumpy, and you take your core of 3 or 5 people, or maybe your 15%, and then you can move them into health and figure out how you can build those healthy interactions. So, oh, thanks, Alyssa, for putting the handout in the chat. So you can download that. And so let's open up the floor. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but this is your time to ask questions and share about either what's been working or what questions you have. So what would you like to share?
Hi, I'll start. I'm Jennifer Hampton Chino in the East District, and I'd have to say my church is very welcoming. Uh, for the most part, we're a very small church. We're turning 130 on the 11th, so we're really excited about that. We have had a variety of people and a lot of some diversity in there. Um, but one area of people that some of our members have a problem with it is maybe the unhoused. And
Mhm.
the reason for and let me clarify that to be those with perhaps mental illnesses. We did have our church pretty much burned down in 2007 because a homeless person got mad at us that we wouldn't let her and her boyfriend sleep overnight inside our sanctuary or on the property. The pastor did offer vouchers, but mental illness took over, and she stole a car and gas cans and set our church on fire. $2 million worth of damage later. Um, and so our church is very sensitive about that. And I know we have a pretty big unhoused population in our area of our church. And sometimes they're camped out on the steps of our social hall. And even I struggle. I'm so open. I try to be really welcoming, but I struggle with, I have to protect the members too. And so, do we call the sheriff's department? Thankfully, the Chino Police Department is caring and has a team. But this is something I've struggled with. And I know that some other members have, because if someone comes in and looks a little not as put together as the average person, they're like really wary of them, and that hurts my heart. So anyways, that's, I'm just putting it out there. Just that's what our little church deals with.
I have, thanks for sharing. I have a thought, and then if anyone else has encountered this in your church, you're welcome to share briefly as well. I I wonder, like this sounds so Methodist and so power oriented, but it could be helpful if there was a consensus protocol on like different levels of how you could interact with people. And you might already have this, but if there was a group and it's like, here's our plan, and I don't mean like managing people, but
Mhm.
we welcome all of these levels of interaction. And also, these are the lines that we will take action, and we have the right team who will help take action or redirect. Now, you might already have that, but that's my first thought.
Yeah. I think that the pastor does, but she's half-time, and so she's
Hmm.
not on the church campus. And so our very tiny little church secretary or administrative assistant, she's got to be maybe 4 feet at the most. She gets worried, and so she will, if she, so she has to call the sheriff's department
Hmm.
because sometimes they can be unruly. But I do know if the pastor's there, or if it's a Sunday, we try. There's a bit of a plan. There probably needs to be a better one though. So that's something good to bring up. Thank you.
Hmm. Well, thank you. Has anyone else on the call encountered a similar situation? Barb, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. We spent a few years in Santa Rosa, my husband and I, and there they established a Tuesday evening dinner for homeless where the church members were invited to have meal and worship with the homeless. And they came together, and over time, the homeless became in charge of the new homeless people that came. If someone came in and they acted out, one of the homeless people would take them outside and explain to them, this is church. We don't do that here. And they became the enforcers. And there was a very strong connection. And a couple of them became official members of the church. And one Easter, one man came in, and the whole, almost an eighth of the church smelled from his strength and of his body odor. And this one woman and her daughter just sat there next to him through the whole service and didn't get up and move or anything. It was just awesome. But I'm not certain how long it took to get to that point. But it was a commitment of the church to have this meal and have different people volunteer to 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 make the meal and to invite all the homeless.
Thanks for that example. There's a lot of different models. And as we've all shared, it's not a one and done. It's building relationships, and it's not easy.
I should just quickly add that one of our ministries is to people experiencing homelessness, and we
Mhm.
have actually pretty darn successful hygiene kit program. So even though that's an area of of some concern, we still do what we can, and we make these tons of hygiene kits. So yeah, that's good for on our side.
Mhm. This is great. Thanks for sharing. Are there other questions or comments? Anna.
Thank you so much for this time. And I am a pastor at the St. Paul's United Methodist Church. And we are blessed with having 5 different ethnic groups that worship together. And we do celebrate our diversity immensely. And World Communion Sunday is our favorite Sunday of the year. My question is, even though the majority of the congregation members are of Asian descent, the leadership is mostly white and African American. And I have tried over the years to engage the majority ethnic group to be more in the leadership. And I have gained some success, but not as vastly as I would like it to be, where it's usually the leadership that will step up will be mostly the patriarch of the families, right? And that works well, but they are aging, and I would like to engage younger, more middle-aged people. And besides the work and all those other extra life stuff, but it seems to me that there is a sense of hesitancy from the Asian descent ethnic groups that they don't want to be in leadership. And a lot of it, I think, sometimes is the differences on how communication is expressed during committee meetings. Different ethnic groups, racial groups can be a little louder, and that can be misinterpreted. So how do you and then they may not be as clear in their English or as fluent. I can sense that they get intimidated and they're not able to express their feelings, or they feel like there's impatience, among the other groups. So is there any suggestions about that?
That's a challenging situation.
And I guess I want to also integrate the notion that the leadership comprised of African Americans and whites, they're very accepting. I mean, these people have been in the congregation for decades, so they've been together for a long time. So it's not so much the lack of bridging, it's just cultural differences in communication and feeling intimidated. It's a challenge. So I wanted to see if you have any how-tos.
Are there any areas in this congregation where you have seen these leaders be able to rise up, like outside of these committees or other ministries, or is it everywhere kind of hierarchical?
It's pretty much everywhere hierarchical, but there's been pockets of ministries or mostly events where the Filipinos usually will have social gatherings / Bible study. So that seems to go well, but it's usually pretty integrated within their own culture.
Okay. Is the hope to integrate across cultures or to move individual leaders into positions of power, or both?
I think the social gatherings work well because the white and Black congregations love the food and they like to gather. So I don't think there's an issue there, but it's more we like to have leadership among the Filipino, the Japanese, congregation members.
Do you think they want to be in other positions of leadership?
I think some do.
Okay.
And but again, they come and the word gets out, right? That if you go, they're going to be talking about this thing. This is how they act, etc., etc. So they kind of hide away, like, oh, no, I don't know if I want to be there. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
One idea, and then I would open it up to others who may
Sure,
have a similar
sure.
experience. I wonder if it could be helpful to bring together 3, 4, or 5 persons who you think would be a really promising, like your next leadership group, and tell them you want to mentor and support them, or maybe someone else, like one of the existing members, one of the white or black members. I know that that could create a power dynamic. If it's not healthy, don't do this, throw out the
Right.
idea. But if it's about, if you think that it would be empowering and saying, we want your voice and we want you to travel together as a group, maybe that would be a tactic.
So what I've been doing lately is selecting the white and African American members who are able to bridge better,
Hmm.
and having them engage into come to see us how we act,
Hmm.
or what we do. And you don't have to participate by saying anything, but take notes as if you have any questions about what we do. And what I've been doing also is talking to the more vocal, voiceful people by their cultural practice is and giving them hints. People communicate differently. We don't go. Some people don't go from A to Z in a straight line. Some people are more circular, cyclical. So I've been doing more of a cultural training with others who, because they would say, well, they come and they don't say anything. Well, how about inviting them to see if they
Mhm.
have something to say and being patient, right? Taking
Mhm.
the time. And so I've been doing some of that, but it's still very slow moving.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm. It's my last thought, this is easier said than done, but I
sure.
wonder if asking the people in positional power to do those 4 little steps, like to have conversations about similarities and differences, and then to reflect upon their own cultural humility. So there you're making them self-reflect. It's not a guarantee. We can always invite people to
Right.
self-reflect and they may not change, but it could be,
Okay.
it's worth trying, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah. Will we have those slides available
Yep,
for us?
yep,
Okay, great,
they're
great.
in, the handout is in the chat, so
I,
you
I,
can download it.
Yeah, I really like that idea of having
Mhm.
the conversation,
Uh-huh.
creating the environment to do that and make it more develop that in a more organic way. I'll have to think it through, but
Mhm,
I
mhm.
think those questions will be valuable. Thank
It's a
you.
start. You're welcome. You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank
Any
you.
other, Alyssa, I don't know what our time is. Do you want to should we take another question or do we need to wrap up?
Yeah, we can take another question.
Okay,
Um, I also could pose a question if we don't
sure.
have someone else in there.
Any other
Um,
questions?
Okay, I'm gonna
No?
take that as an I can go.
Okay.
So I think one thing that probably a lot of our congregations deal with, which touches a little bit on what Anna was saying, but we have a wide diversity within our congregations, right? And so we have a lot of different cultural backgrounds and cultural experiences and cultural practices coming into play. And one thing that I think a lot of us are concerned about or want to make sure that we're doing with integrity is honoring various traditions without it feeling like tokenism. And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering if you have it doesn't have to be specific strategies, but maybe some tips to approaching those conversations of, hey, we're noticing that we're using a lot of, the white colonial United
Mhm.
Methodist
Mhm.
practices
Mhm.
in our churches, and we'd like to make sure that we're honoring the various practices of the people who are making up our congregation. But how do we do that in a way that doesn't feel like a performance or we're asking people to perform their identity once a year or once a month?
That's a great question. That's a great question because it can easily turn into that. I wonder if the first step would be one-on-one conversations and not asking someone who may be not in the majority in that congregation. You're not asking, what can you do for the majority, but asking, what would you like to see more of? And then do you have any suggestions for how we do that? And to explicitly say, we're not asking you to do that unless you wanted to. Um, because they might provide an idea or an opportunity that those in the majority or those who have already been designing worship or experiences just wouldn't have thought of. And so instead of saying, well, we'll just plug this little thing in, really being open-ended. And then also in the middle of the handout, I think the first step, like with the little person on the stairs, it says, what are the dimensions of diversity, or what are the differences that make a difference that shape you? That is a really powerful question to ask a group or a congregation, to say, what are the differences that make a difference that shape your ministry in the world, or your faith, or your discipleship journey? And then if you can get people to talk about it, to say, you know what, my race and my gender have shaped how I understand Jesus, or where I grew up and where I live now shapes why I go to church, or my political views and my theology impact why I have stayed at this church. Having those questions in small groups, or even asking people to ask those questions to themselves and then find a buddy and talk about it, that can be really, really powerful. And then it turns into more than just the majority who's in charge. And then we're asking someone who is a minority to provide a service, a one-time service, like a performance. So those would be my first ideas.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Is there anything else from the group? I think it's your lunchtime. It's my kid's gonna get off the bus soon. She's in third grade, so I'm in Ohio, so it's
Oh, fun.
it's all good. But thank you so much for
Yeah.
allowing this conversation today. I am thankful for all the work that all of you are doing. We are a part of a connection. The church is bigger than just our individual churches, and the joy of the United Methodist Church is we have this shared knowledge so that we can ask our friends and say, what's worked for you? I really loved how we had that conversation about unhoused ministry and how we could engage with people, lower anxiety, and really let everyone be welcome. So thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. These are not easy times. And being a Christian in the world today, it can be challenging because we may have to say, we're not that kind of Christian. We really do welcome everyone. So thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. And Alyssa, thank you for the invitation. It's been great to be with the group today.
Thank you all so much. I apologize. I have landscaping like right outside my window, if you can hear that, but
all good.
we and we would love to hear from you all if you take this back to your congregation and you're implementing some of these steps and then you have feedback on, we could really use training on this, or we have more questions about this, let me know, and we'll see how we can resource those needs as well. So thank you all so much for coming today. We know this lunchtime is kind of a fun little break in your day, hopefully. Have a great day, everyone.